Howdy, folks. It's time to Cowboy Up. Welcome to our celebration of the American cowboy. I'm Ron Wilson, Cowboy Poet Laureate, and I'm mighty pleased to be your host. Did you ever watch Roy Rogers on television growing up? It was one of my favorite things to see Roy Rogers fight the bad guys on TV and before that, in the movies. Hollywood quickly learned that the American cowboy was a source of great excitement and entertainment and attracted fans across the country and around the world. And whatever else happened on those shows, the good guy won. Today we're going to have some good guys tell us about the history of the American cowboy and celebrate the cowboy in music and rhyme. We have some good guys on the show today. We'll hear from outstanding musician David Smart, cowboy poets Tim Kaine, and Marshall Bailey, the official marshal of Dodge City. We'll hear from Orrin Friesen about the history of Western music and outstanding musician Jeff Davidson. So saddle up and come enjoy the ride. I'm talking with David Smart, the noted guitarist. David, you grew up in the 60s when there were lots of television shows that were Westerns.
They were.
And you watched probably some of those Westerns.
I did. I was a big Bonanza fan, and I remember Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp. I had a pair of Wyatt Earp pistols when I was a kid. I remember that. Yeah.
In later years, you connected with the Western Music Association.
I did.
How did you, because you do all kinds of beautiful music, how did the migration into Western music happen?
Well, when I was a kid, my dad used to sing cowboy music to me, and we enjoyed that kind of music. And when I got the guitar, it was just natural to play. Well, when I first started playing, half the guitar songs I learned at the beginning were folk Western songs, cowboy tunes, Red River Valley. And I also enjoyed listening to the Spanish-style music from the Southwest. And that was really good. And I love just being in that kind of environment. And so the Western Music Association was a different avenue I could take. Normally I play a lot of church concerts, but the Western Music Association was just, hey, these folks are living a certain lifestyle that's wholesome and fun, and I enjoyed that. And
now you have Western CD as well as your other CDs that are being marketed around here.
Yes, I do. I have a title that's called Unsung Heroes, Cowboy Songs, or Guitar Songs of the American West. And it's doing pretty good.
One of those classic old Westerns back in the day was Zorro. And now we're going to hear David Smart with Zorro music.
For a lot of years, I was summer hay help for my neighbor who raises registered Angus. And old George passed about 3 years ago. But he's found his way into a lot of my poems. And this one is particularly appropriate today because I'm leaving here to go pick up hay. But it's a poem I wrote, I thought, to celebrate the work, but it really is speaking about the work and the fellow I was doing it with. So, and it's called, uncreatively enough, Hay Work. The forecast calls for southwest wind and temps near 100 all day. Already the air seems to stick to my skin as we head for the field to load hay. A meadow of swaying native grass has been swathed, raked, and sun-dried. Now an ocean of 60-pound bales awaits, 70 rods deep and 90 wide. Hook the hay rack to the tractor and the loader to the rack. Put on hay chaps, leather gloves, and stretch you stiff and aging back. The loader hooks each bale as we pass, and I grab each one by the twine. Stack them quickly, build your corners square. Keep the edges true and aligned. A poorly stacked load might not cross the creek, for the trail there is steep and it bends. Aside from the beauty of a well-loaded rack, it keeps you from loading it again. As I unload the wagon and restack the truck that'll haul all these prairie bales home, I hear in the distance the steady clink chunk of old George and the baler alone. 120 bales to a load, 6 to 8 loads to a day. In the field, it seems you'll never be done, but too soon we are through with the hay.
I'm talking with Orrin Friesen, who's a longtime Western music historian, a cowboy performer himself, a radio personality. And Orrin, it's great to visit with you about these things.
I'm enjoying myself.
We love our cowboy music history. You've told us that the cowboy music really literally began with cowboys on cattle drives, entertaining themselves and the herds as they brought the cattle north.
That's correct. That's how it all started.
But then there were some individual cowboy performers in the early days that started to perform these songs for others. Who were some of those key ones?
Well, back in the 1920s is really when, because of recordings, were just kind of new at that time. Jimmy Rogers did a lot of cowboy songs. And then there were guys that really focused on that, like Carl T. Sprague and Jules Verne Allen and some of those guys that came along. And then Ken Maynard came along. He wasn't that great a singer, but then he became a movie star, and then he got Gene Autry to be in there. And of course, Gene Autry was a whole lot better singer than Ken Maynard, so that kind of what kick-started Gene Autry's career, and that's where the big singing cowboy era came from. And Roy Rogers and the Sons of the Pioneers and those guys all came along after that.
Wow, and the history followed from there. There were a couple of key authors and collectors of cowboy songs that managed to preserve some of that so that it wasn't lost. Jack Thorpe.
Jack Thorpe, yes, sir, from the old... he collected a lot of the early cowboy songs in around 1908 or something like that. He came out with a book. A couple of years later, John Lomax wrote a book called Cowboy Songs. John was a collector of all kinds of music. He traveled all around the country, especially in the American South, looking for folk songs. And his first book, I believe it was about cowboy songs. And so a lot of the old classics that we know were first published by John Lomax in his Cowboy Songs book and by Jack Thorpe in his book.
Then came that transition. We came to that era of the recording, and so there were radio stations that started to give more airtime and more play to those cowboy songs.
Yeah, that was interesting too, because guys like the famous Goat Glen doctor, Doc Brinkley, was one of the first ones to use old-time fiddlers and cowboy singers to kind of help promote his radio station and to promote his goat gland operations and all that. But he had Roy Faulkner, who was Doc Brinkley's station was KFKB in Milford, Kansas.
Kansas First, Kansas Best.
That's what it stood for, Kansas. He called it Kansas First, even though it wasn't. But Roy Faulkner was a cowboy singer on there, and he even followed him later when Brinkley got run out of the country and started the very first border station along the Texas-Mexican border, XER, and so Roy Faulkner went with him for a while till he ended up back at WIBW in Topeka years later. But and then Carson Robinson, who was also from Kansas, was probably the biggest early cowboy singer on records. And he went to New York City and worked with Vernon Dalhart.
Wow.
And just became a big star over there. He was the first guy to popularize the song Home on the Range.
Ken Maynard, I've heard, is a name that's credited as the first singing cowboy in the movies.
That's correct. And like I said earlier, he wasn't that great of a singer, but he was the first movie star singing cowboy. And then he got Gene Autry to be in his movies then, and Gene just really shone at that particular point in time and was a much better singer than Ken Maynard.
So when was the advent of the cowboy groups, the singing groups?
Well, I guess Roy Rogers was in several of the other groups prior to that, to the Sons of the Pioneers, but really the Sons of the Pioneers and they formed in 1934. And so that was kind of about the same time that Gene Autry was and Hopalong Cassidy and those guys were starting in the movies. So that was, I really kind of point to 1934 as the era of what we call Western music today.
It's a fascinating ride along the trail of cowboy and Western music in America. Stay tuned for more Cowboy Up.
Now, old Buford Hayes had a medical condition. He's known all around our town. The folks around here called him a living corpse. Kind of fella you just can't keep down. The local physicians were baffled. Even the preacher was at a loss of breath to explain this weird oddity that altered his commodities and so closely imitated his death. You see, it was his heart. It would just stop beating, or so the local doctors thought. His pulse and respiration was no longer found. Well, his vital signs would be shot. 3 times they figured he died, so they wrapped him up in a sheet and hauled him into town. 3 times he woke up inside of a morgue with coffins all around. Now this was kind of aggravating to Buford, who otherwise had never been sick. Not to mention the situation of dying around strangers, because, well, this is the West. Now out here, we bury you quick. So, Buford never strayed too far from home. Never went anywhere on a train. He didn't want to wake up in some undertaker parlor just to find out his blood had been drained. Even worse than that, there was that story by that Edgar Allan Poe about that poor young cuss that woke up in a box buried deep down in a hole. Now, it wasn't that old Buford was scared of dying. He'd been that route before. He just didn't want to die waking up from the dead. He figured that might complicate matters even more. Well, the last time that Buford died was the age of 73. But the whole town being suspicious of a madly so malicious, they forewent the embalming to, well, just wait and see. And at the end of 3 days, when he still hadn't moved, a funeral was finally planned for the Methodist church, the one high on top of the hill, with the long sloping ramp. And them two undertakers was a rolling poor Buford along when the back one tripped, and try as he may, the other guy just couldn't hold on. Well, that casket got loose and rolled down that ramp, and like a bullet, it shot out into the street. And when Buford woke up, he had the weird sensation that his bed was gaining speed. Not only that, it was kind of dark in there and sort of hard to breathe, and when he discovered the paradox of being shut up in a box, he decided it was time for him to leave. Well, meanwhile, about 2 blocks down, Herbie Walters run a little drugstore. The place wasn't all that much, but he did keep a spit shine on that tile floor. And it just so happened that old Herbie was up front washing windows that morning when he looked over the top of his squeegee. I bet y'all wonder what rhymes with squeegee. Took me a few minutes. When he looked out over the top of his squeegee and he seen him a sight, well, sort of like the one he seen on the night that made him give up drinking while playing the old Ouija. Well, best I could do, he seen that casket coming hard and heading right for the front door on his place. So he figured the trajectory, and he also figured he didn't have much time to waste. He flung open that front and run straight to the back, and just when he got to the back door, that gurney smashed into the curb out front and catapulted that casket right in there on the floor. Well, the floor, being waxed and as slick as a lawyer, that's pretty slick. That box never slowed down one bit. Matter of fact, I think it even gained some speed from up front where it first hit. But it was what happened next that'll long be remembered by the patrons of that little store, who had already been scared out of their wits when the dead man bounced through the door. You see, that great big bounce was all that Buford needed to open up the lid on that container, for he had discovered something. Caskets ain't made to be opened from within. That makes them somewhat of a restrainer. Well, when Buford sat up, the women all screamed. Folks around started, like flies, they started dropping. And as he slid past the prescription center, he hollered, "Hey, Herbie, have you got anything to stop this coughing?"
I'm here with Jeff Davidson. Jeff, I consider you a man of many talents, a musician, cowboy poet, rangeland plant identification specialist, watershed specialist, former extension educator, and you're also currently president of the Kansas chapter of the Western Music Association. What is the purpose of the WMA?
Well, the purpose of the Western Music Association is simply to promote and perform Western music. We try to take that out to people, kind of introduce it or maybe reintroduce it to the folks, and besides just the music, we try to live and be examples, I guess, of the Western lifestyle. Just sort of the cowboy up and do things the cowboy way.
That's great. How did you yourself get started with Western music?
I started singing before I can remember, actually. I guess I used to just sing maybe to entertain myself. And my dad was a singer, sang in a church quartet for over 40 years, but he also sang Western music. That was kind of his thing, and I kind of grew up listening to Marty Robbins records as well as my dad. When I was roughly 50 years old, probably, I was up at the old home place, and I was out in the backyard picking up some limbs, and my mother had come out there, and she was talking to me. We were not far from the little barn where I used to milk a cow when I was a little kid, she told me, she says, I used to come out here in this backyard and just to listen to you sing while you milked the cow. You almost always sang when you milked the cow, and you had the prettiest voice, soprano voice. And it was kind of one of those, really, moments for me. I didn't know that, and I suppose I was 8, 9, 10 years old at the time, but I thought that was just kind of interesting.
And singing ever since. We don't have a cow for you to milk, but we do have some songs from you. Tell us about the song Along the Chisholm Trail.
Well, Ron, you know about that song because, Ron, you wrote the words to the song, the lyrics, and shared it. It was a poem, and you shared that with me, and I got to looking at it, and I kind of liked it as a song. And so I put a tune to the song, and I think it went together well, and both you and I like the song, and so that's what you're about to hear.
You've improved my poem 100%. This is Jeff Davidson with Along the Chisholm Trail.
150 years ago emerged a vital tale. It helped the fledgling nation grow along the Chisholm Trail. A man called Chisholm freighted goods to Indian tribes for sale. His wagons rolled through plains and woods along the Chisholm Trail. So history followed Chisholm's route through much frontier travail. Soon longhorn herds would graze, no doubt, along the Chisholm Trail. The battles of the Civil War had left the nation frail, but Texas Pete would help restore along the Chisholm Trail. Come a tie, yippee-tie-yi. Then came a man named Joe McCoy, his vision did entail trailing of bees with cowboys along the Chisholm Trail. Come a tie, yippee-tie-yi. The longhorn herds were ranging free through Texas hill and vale. They were the opportunity along the Chisholm Trail. So drovers moved the cattle north to Kansas Iron Horse Rail. 3 million head would travel forth along the Chisholm Trail. They fought stampedes and Injun braves, the hazards to curtail. Some left their pods in shallow graves along the Chisholm Trail. It became the nation's story how cowboys did prevail and earned America's glory along the Chisholm Trail. Their true written deeds of daring historians regale, of bravery shown and sparing along the Chisholm Trail. Come a tie, yippee-tie-yi. And now we pause to celebrate and honor without fail the legacy they did create along the Chisholm Trail. Come a tie, yippee-tie-yi. So come along and lend an ear to the night wind's low wail, whispering legends you will hear along the Chisholm Trail. Whispering legends you will hear along the Chisholm Trail.
Folks, it's been great having you with us today. Thanks for joining us for our Cowboy Up television show. Special thanks to our guests on today's show, musician David Smart, cowboy poets Tim Kaine, and Alan Bailey, the official marshal of Dodge City. Thanks to Orrin Friesen, our cowboy historian, and musician Jeff Davidson. This is your host, cowboy poet laureate Ron Wilson, saying, cowboy songs and poems lift spirits like the coffee in your cup. So come back and join us next time as we all cowboy up. Happy trails.
Window and watch the snow blowing by. Or in your pickup truck with the windows down, feeding cattle as it drifts up high. Or you're dreading the walk down to the stock tank, you gotta break that ice. And your forehead's froze, you got a runny nose, but oh how you love this life.